So our focus for this lesson is going to be taking a look today at integers. And your learning target is going to be I can demonstrate an understanding of integers by finding number opposites and locating integers on a number line. So when we think about the depth and complexity icon that we're going to be looking at today we're really going to be looking at parallels. We're going to be looking at parallels of numbers. So first, let's start by defining what an integer is. So an integer are your counting numbers. Your counting numbers are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Those are our counting numbers, right? When we start counting, we start by going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. And their opposites. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the counting numbers and their opposites. So their opposites are going to be the same distance from 0 on a number line. So 0 is not going to be a positive or negative number. 0 is neutral. Okay, so we need to remember that as we go out through our lesson that 0 is going to be neutral. But an opposite is going to be how far, or it's going to be a number that's going to be equal distance from 0 on both sides of the number line, both positive and negative. So in this lesson, when we talk about integers, there are counting numbers and their opposites, but we're also going to be looking at the numbers that are going to be less than 0. We've spent a lot of time looking at numbers that are less than 1. So fractions are going to be values that are less than 1, and decimals are going to be values that are less than 1s. When we talk about negative numbers are going to be less than zeros. And there are circumstances where we have values less than 0, and we use those numbers to show it, whether it's a negative bank balance or temperatures that are below 0, below sea level. So there's lots of examples on how we can represent integers. Okay, so if we take a look, if I have a value of 6, so my first integer that I'm going to look at is 6. So if I look and count, 6 is going to be 6 units away from 0. Its opposite also needs to be 6 units away from 0. So if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this right here is going to be my opposite. So this is also going to be 6 units away. So the opposite of 6 is going to be -6. Now, when we write notation and when we talk about opposite notation, so the opposite notation is going to be written as the opposite of a value. So here, the opposite of 6 is going to be equal to -6. Okay, so that is the opposite of a number. So that negative number or that negative sign in front of parentheses is going to represent an opposite notation. Another way that I can represent an opposite notation is if I simply have the words the opposite of. Okay, so that's going to be another one where I'm looking at notations, the opposite of, and then whatever the value is. So if I gave you the opposite of -5, so I first find -5 on that number line. So going back to that learning target, I'm now locating integers on my number line. So I find -5. And remember, an opposite is going to be the same distance away. So if I count how far away it is from 0, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm looking for a number that's 5 units away. So it's going to be a positive number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the opposite of -5 is 5. Okay? So we can write when you see this. So I go back to, so if I have this with -5, this notation means the opposite of -5, which is going to be 5. Okay? So the opposite of -5 is going to be 5. All right. So heading into your values, if I give you this one, so if I have, what is the value of the opposite of -9? Well, -9 is my number. The opposite of -9 is going to be 9 because they are both 9 units away from 0. All right. Heading to your guided practice. So number 1 says, what do you know about two different integers that are opposite? Well, when we have two integers, so two integers that are opposite of each other, are going to be located, oh, I totally just spelled opposite wrong. I'm just going to underline it and move on. Opposite of each other are located the same distance apart from 0. Okay, so again, if I have, let's say I have 4 and I want to know what is the opposite of 4. So the opposite of 4, remember this notation right here, when I have the negative number outside of a parenthesis, means the opposite of. The opposite of 4 is going to be the same distance away. So 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. So this is going to be 4 units, which means my opposite needs to be 4 units as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 units away. So my opposite is going to be negative 4. Okay. All right. Number 2 says, how do you read this value? So how I would say this value is, I would not say subtract 17. I read it as negative 17. So this value is read as negative 17. Okay. Which integers are not used for counting? So remember at the beginning of the lesson when I defined integers, I said integers are the counting numbers. So if I look at my number line here, my counting numbers, we always start with 1, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. These right here are my counting numbers. So if I look at what are not my counting numbers, my non-counting numbers are going to be 0 and negative numbers. Those are my non-counting numbers. They're still integers, but they are not counting numbers. Okay. Alrighty, so in 4 through 9, we're going to write the opposite of each integer. So if I have 1, the opposite of 1 is going to be negative 1. Okay, so I'm just going to set it like this. Set up my phrasing. Opposite of. So if I have, my next one is going to be negative 1. So if negative 1, the opposite of negative 1 is going to be 1. Okay, the next value that I have, so I'm looking at number 6 now, is I have negative 11. So the negative 11, the opposite of negative 11 is going to be 11. Okay, if I have 30, so I'm looking for the opposite of 30, the opposite of 30 is going to be negative 30. If I have the opposite of 0, well, 0 is a neutral number. It's neither positive nor negative. It's also the same distance apart. The opposite of 0 is going to be 0. And then if I have the opposite of negative 16, remember that's what this notation means, the opposite of negative 16 is going to be 16. Okay, so you guys are going to do both sides of your practice. You're going to do your independent practice and then your math practices and problem solving, making sure that you guys are showing the values of your integers. So we're finding number opposites, and remember that number opposites are the same distance apart from zeros, and use your number lines to help locate them if you need to.